Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live today, Sunday, July 22nd, 2007. I'm Matt Dillahunty, and joining me is Russell Glasser.
I've got a huge spoiler for you.
Oh, boy.
Jesus comes back to life.
No! Welcome, everybody. We're live, as we said. This is an interactive public access television program, and we'll have a number up for you shortly so you can call in and talk with us. It's an opportunity for atheists in the Austin area to interact with the public, answer questions, discuss issues, debate the merits of different beliefs and claims, and generally have a good time, provide a little bit of fun, a little bit of education for both of us. I enjoy the fact that a lot of times we have people calling in to explain things to us, and subjects that interest me because, religion in general is one of my interests. So I don't mind as a matter of fact, I enjoy the occasional correction and additional detail. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Ventana del Sol on East Old Torf, beginning at 11 o'clock, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. The August lecture, which I believe is like the 4th or 5th, I'll actually be giving that lecture. So instead of bringing in somebody who knows something, we're just going to let me ramble on about hell for a while.
Not unlike the expert topics on the shows that people just research on Wikipedia.
Yes. So I got together a bunch of art on hell, and it's going to be kind of a lighthearted romp through the history of bad afterlives, or claims about bad afterlives. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. You can find out more about that at www.nonprofitsradio.com. We'll be live again this coming Saturday, the 28th, I think. It's hosted by Dennis Lubay, co-hosted by myself. We now have some new equipment, and while I haven't actually been able to get the telephone hybrid working up to my specs, we're hoping to have it done so that we can take phone calls on that show and when I say take phone calls, it won't be like this. We're not going to be having a call-in format for that program as well. It'll be guests and co-hosts from out of town who can call in and visit with us, conduct interviews and things like that. That program, while it doesn't take phone calls, is done live on Saturdays every other Saturday from 2 to 3:30. We sometimes run a little bit over. And we run a chat room in conjunction with the program where the people listening live can talk amongst themselves. Once upon a time, they could talk to us, but quite frankly, I'm way too distracted to interact with chat. But
sorry about that.
No, it's nobody's fault. In addition to the regular Sunday meetings, we also have a number of social events throughout the week. This Wednesday, we'll be playing pool at Side Pocket Billiards on North Lamar. It's just a couple blocks south of Breaker. The pool actually started at 8 o'clock, but I think most of us are going to start meeting up there around 7:30, maybe a little bit earlier if you want to. The pool is covered for the first 8 people or 4 tables or whatever it turns out to be, and we can work it out after that if we get a bunch of people showing up. In addition, also on Thursdays, we have Atheist Happy Hour at the Dog and Duck Pub at 17th and Guadalupe. It's a good chance to meet some of the people who are involved in the TV show and just regular members of the ACA. Have a drink, grab a bite to eat, and talk about any topics you want to for the most part. And after this program's over, everybody involved in the show gets together, and now we're going to IHOP at Cesar Chavez and I-35. The show's over at 4:30. We get down there about 5. We've got the room from 5 to 7. You don't have to be a member to attend any of our events, apart from one that we just won't even mention. It's a secret. But all the other events are open to the public as long as you're an atheist or atheist-friendly person, which means you can be a Bible-thumping believer who is willing to tolerate and have reasonable discussions with people who don't believe. You're welcome to come to our events, and there's a good chance that things like that will happen on occasion. Mostly for the after-show dinners and other things, we're just looking to have a good meal. Hey, you're watching Atheist Experience. They've got new credits that pop up over our show on occasion. But there's a lot of conversation goes on at the different events, and people are welcome to come down. If you're not interested in coming down, or if you don't get through on the television show, you can also email tv@atheist-community.org. That email goes to myself, the co-host, some of the people behind the scenes, and while we cannot promise to respond to everything, we will certainly try and read everything. And the reason that we can't promise to respond to everything is that the audio portion of this show, as well as the Nonprofits podcast, is available for download. And the video portion of this show is now being uploaded to Google Video. And we have evidently, I don't know, a couple of years, maybe 3 years worth of video that's already up there, and more on the way, which means now, excuse me, our audience is international, which is cool because I've gotten emails from all over the world and I've started marking them on a map, or I've claimed that I've started marking them on a map. Mostly I'm keeping notes so that I can mark them on that map. But so we love hearing from everybody. If you've got corrections or comments, feedbacks, criticisms, ideas for show topics, ideas for show music, feel free to email tv@atheist-community.org. You can also...
Yeah, so you're saying not only are they multinational, but they're now intertemporal in the sense that they're writing to us from the past about shows that we did like 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's a good point to mention. I've said a number of times that we're not only willing but happy to get information, corrections, and I'll correct anything that I've said in error on the show or an email or whatever else as we can. But don't write me about a show that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and say, you said this and I think it's wrong, because while I'll happily discuss it, I have. I mean, there were some comments made about, you said that In God We Trust didn't appear on money until the 50s, and I think that's not quite what I said, but in any case, it's not really worth going back in time to 2 years ago. But if you catch me within a couple weeks, we can correct it.
If I could go back in time to 2 years ago, correcting piddling little errors on a show wouldn't be my first course of action.
Yeah.
Investing in something would.
Oh, so you're just greedy.
Yes.
Okay. And that's about it for the regular announcements. I know there's something I'm forgetting, but I've forgotten it. So welcome to the show. We'll have the number up for you shortly.
You can have your book back, by the way. I'm not going. By the time I get around to reading this, the spoilers will have spoilers. Yeah. That would be sometime after I'm out of grad school.
It's Harry Potter weekend, evidently.
Unless I download it on my iPod sometime soon. Let's see. So I came up with this great idea about half a year ago of starting to talk about evolution, and that turned out to be an especially great idea because it got stretched out into many, many shows and saved me from having to come up with actually new topics.
I was thinking about adding a little title across the bottom that says, this week we have Russell Glasser, Creationism Evolution Correspondent. Senior creationist.
And then I could appear in front of a little green screen like on The Daily Show and say, I'm coming at you live from the Creationist Museum.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Unfortunately, we have no budget.
Right. Too bad about that. But we do have another topic to cover, and I thought maybe this would be the last one before I'm completely tapped out of evolution topics, and I'd have to start thinking of new ones again. This month I was planning to talk about evolutionary psychology, and then I remembered that evolutionary psychology actually leads really neatly into game theory, which is a whole topic unto itself. So I got one more show to go with this.
Sweet.
All right, so where we've been is basically in the last few months, I've laid out what the evidence is for evolution, why we think it's true, why we as atheists are especially interested in talking about it, why creationist arguments, some of them are really, really bad, and some of them are just bad once you start digging into them. We've talked about intelligent design. And there's one more place that we haven't really gone, which is a lot of people are bothered by evolution because it seems ultimately like an impersonal way of looking at the universe. One of the things people call about when we're talking about atheism in general, we say, we don't believe in God because there's no good evidence for it, and they come back with a fairly common counter, which is, well, can you prove that love exists? Or how do you explain love if you don't have a God? Which is a total non sequitur because, God doesn't explain love. People already have this concept of love and they map it onto God. But there's still the question of what does love mean in a sort of materialistic model of the universe? And one of the things that evolutionary psychology does is address that question. Evolutionary psychology essentially means that people are built up as gene machines. They're good at doing things to the extent that they are advantageous in their environment to do those things. And one of the things that we as humans are keenly aware that it's a good idea to do in order to survive and reproduce a lot is think. That's kind of our niche. We're not unusually fast or strong. We're just kind of mediocre in the animal kingdom, except for our big, giant, cumbersome brains. Well, evolutionary psychology, it turns out, is a field of study. It's kind of controversial, but it basically addresses the concept of why is it that we think the way we do, and how does evolution handle that? Well, first of all, I'd like to take a minute to explain what evolution has to do with thinking and behavior and the way you act. It's not just about how strong or fast or how many sperm you produce or whatever. There are actually sorts of behaviors that are affected by basically instinct, which comes about through evolution. You'll notice that if you think about it for a minute, the kind of things that feel good or bad to you can sort of roughly map to how good or bad they actually are for you in terms of surviving and reproducing. Now, I don't want to overgeneralize because there are obviously a lot of things that we do that are harmful to ourselves. But in general, I mean, think about it. If you touch a hot stove, it feels bad, and you jerk your hand back and you say, ow. Well, it's a lucky thing you do that, because it turns out that holding your hand on a hot stove for a long time damages you. And if you were to sit there with your hand on the stove, then it would cook your hand, and then you'd have a harder time surviving. So touching something hot feels bad. Holding your breath for a really long time feels bad. On the other hand, well, also, being hungry feels bad. And conversely, eating something really delicious feels good. Food is yummy. And another really handy fact is sex is fun. People, generally speaking, they may beat themselves up over inappropriate sexual feelings, but they also really enjoy it while they're doing it. Now, the question is, why are we so lucky that it happens to hurt when we touch a hot stove, and it happens to feel bad when we don't eat, and good when we do eat, and good when we do things to carry on our genes, like have sex? And the answer is actually pretty simple if you think about it in evolutionary terms, which is basically, suppose that you'll recall that the way that evolution works is that basically small changes happen over time, and if the small changes are generally good for you, then the changes get passed on to a lot of descendants, and those descendants tend to mimic the behaviors of their parents, so that anything that's good tends to get passed on, and anything that's bad eventually dies out and goes extinct. So imagine...
I think it might be worth pointing out, as we have a couple of other times, that that this selection process is blind, and it actually seems to work as selecting against things that are harmful.
Right.
So what gets passed on is both the good and the benign.
Right.
So that you can have... It's the reason why some people are still born sterile.
Yes.
Because that's something that is bad, which would have been phased out. However, the recessive genes for sterility in some people are passed along because they're not harmful or not sufficiently harmful to most people. Same reason that men have nipples.
Right.
Because it's easier.
There's no use to having nipples, but there's nothing particularly wrong with them either.
Well, we have nipples because females have nipples, and we all start as females.
Right. So so I'm going to ask a question, which is basically, what if putting your hand on a hot stove felt good? I mean, if there were a special strain of people, like, let's not say right now, but let's say a long time ago when culture was first developing, and there was some kind of mutation that rewired your brain in such a way that doing something painful actually felt really good. And if this was actually something that gets passed on to a lot of children, then what you'd find is that a lot of people with that mutation would be doing a lot of self-destructive things.
There'd be nobody in Hawaii because they all would have wandered into the volcanoes and killed themselves off.
That's right. They'd be like, oh, that feels nice and warm. Lava, that's great. Love it.
Keeps the skin so clean.
And then they'd all be dead, and then no more problem. The people who don't have that mutation wind up winning the evolutionary game. Similarly, of course, if eating hurt you, then you would, and being hungry felt good, then no one would ever see a need to go put things in their mouths, and they'd all die. Also, if sex didn't feel good, if there was a mutation where most people with the particular mutation stopped enjoying that particular act, then there would be very little bearing of children. And while that wouldn't hurt the people in this particular generation, it would mean that they mostly don't have children. And that's what it means to sort of win the evolutionary game, is have a lot of children who continue to pass on the genes that have worked out well for you. And having a I hate sex gene is just a really maladaptive adaptation. That's kind of interesting if you think about it, because basically people tend to think of evolution in terms of being selfish. I mean, they tend to think of survival of the fittest, and when they say fittest, what they mean is the strongest, the fastest, the smartest, and so on. Things that are basically selfish to the individual, that are especially suited to make an individual member of the species do really well for themselves and survive for a long time. But the fact is, you could be the most fit individual in the world in the sense of, being basically Superman, really fast and strong and powerful. But if you're not having sex and not having children, then your genes die anyway. Even the genes that contribute to you being strong and fast and so on.
And interestingly, the way natural selection works as kind of this sieve, it can change what it's actually selecting against, which could, once upon a time, the ideal woman, as we see from paintings and stuff, was this more plumper woman, because that represented kind of affluence and means and would be good for childbearing and everything else. And now we've progressed to where to some people, these
very
waif-thin coke fiends are the new kind of appealing.
Although I'm not really sure that can be attributed to, I'm hesitant to attribute anything very much that happened in the last few thousand years to actual evolution changing our genes, because that's a very, very short time in terms of things. And most of the ways that we behave are ways that were sort of programmed into us by evolution, millions of years ago.
Right, and what I'm talking about isn't that the genes have changed since then, because one of the key things that Dennett and others bring up is that Darwin's idea of natural selection doesn't just apply to biology. It applies all over the place. It is the universal solvent that lets us understand how any changes are processed over time. So when I'm talking about, for example, preferences, this is something that happens through changes in society, through changes in how we think and what we think. Miniskirts were obscene, and then all of a sudden they were the fashion, and now they're like too short or too long, evidently for some people. But these changing ideas, preferences, memes, if you want, they're also subject to a sort of natural selection that isn't in the same as the biological natural selection, but it affects the biological natural selection. Our preferences that change It's always been people would say, well, now we're really done evolving. That we're in this phase of artificial selection, and it's true. We're able to artificially select because of consciousness and our free will. We're also going to be able to do probably more artificial selection with genetic programming or whatever else.
Right.
But the changes that have occurred societally are part of natural selection, because no matter what the cause was, if the general preference among women changes from being towards more physically fit men to nerds with brains, then that changes who gets to survive, and it affects the natural selection outcome even over a short period.
Yeah,
so while we're not going to grow a fourth arm or anything nifty like that.
Yeah, well, let's see. So anyway, I mean, that's kind of an interesting point, which is that even though people think about evolution as basically a selfish process, the question is sort of at what level does selfishness happen? And Richard Dawkins, of course, has written a book called The Selfish Gene, where he specifically put forward the theory that we shouldn't think of things in terms of survival of the individual. We should instead think of things in terms of there are all these genes out there, and genes are basically information that gets carried on from person to person or animal to animal or plant to plant. And it's the genes which are taking care of their own survival. And if you think about things in those terms, it really makes a lot more sense the way people act a lot of the time. Like, for instance, if you thought that people were only concerned about their own survival, you might wonder why people put so much time and energy into taking care of their kids. I mean, they generally don't get that much of a payoff out of having children personally, but people have this basically emotion that kicks in when their child shows up, which is the child is very cute. I love this child. I want good things to happen to my son or daughter, and that is just the way people act. When you see things in terms of evolution in general, you kind of get in the mindset where basically most of the things that we do have to make sense within an evolutionary context. In other words, if it wasn't a good survival trait to really love your children, then it wouldn't usually happen. I mean, love is typically something that we can't control. It's just something that triggers an emotional response of some sort. So basically, it doesn't make sense to love your children if you're just thinking in terms of survival of the individual, but it makes perfect sense if you're thinking in terms of survival of the genes. If you love your children and protect them from harm, really what it is your genes are actually doing things to protect themselves from harm, because they know, I mean, I don't want to say no, but I mean, there is sort of a factual result of things that when you have a child, there are copies of the very same genes that are in you. And the genes can be thought of as sort of working to preserve themselves. Now, genes are not physical things. They're patterns. They're forms of information. And of course, another thing that Dawkins promotes in The Selfish Gene is the idea that there could be the equivalent of genes inside minds, which he refers to as memes. And I believe they've been talked about on the show before. Meme is basically a word that Dawkins made up to indicate the concept of something that's like a gene, but it's really a memory. So, for instance, knowing the song Happy Birthday is a meme. And the song Happy Birthday sort of has a life of its own in the sense that it gets passed on from person to person. It gets taught to a lot of people. The Happy Birthday song is an extremely successful meme because a lot of people know it and pass it on. Just like the sex feels good gene and the love your children gene are also very successful because they happen to be really good at surviving across many generations. In fact, there was kind of a funny thing that I remember reading a long time ago, although I can't remember where in particular I wrote it, but it said, a scholar is just a library's way of creating another library. That's sort of backwards from what we're usually used to thinking. We think about scholars creating things, but under this sort of information model of survival, what that means is when you have a library full of interesting stuff and a scholar comes along and reads it, he is inspired to go and write more stuff that builds off of that original material. And so the library winds up creating more future libraries through the vehicle of the scholar.
It's actually more of a symbiotic relationship too.
Yeah.
Because a library is a scholar's way of creating more scholars.
That too.
Ooh.
And in a very similar fashion, a gene is, a person is a gene's way of creating another gene.
Right.
But those genes are usually actually beneficial to the people who are carrying them. Except in the case of reproduction, where they're mainly beneficial to themselves and future copies of themselves. And as a parent, you don't necessarily get a personal payoff from from seeing your children grow up and become productive members of society, except to the extent that you get a good, happy feeling, which is basically your genes giving you positive feedback, saying, "Thank you very much for helping me go on to the next generation." So, getting back to the question of where, what does love mean in a materialistic worldview? This all doesn't sound very romantic, but essentially, it's an observable fact that people act in these weird ways that we have chosen to put the label love on, and there are actually a lot of different kinds of behaviors that we refer to as love. For instance, I've already mentioned that we love our children. And the reason it makes sense to love your children is because your children have a copy of your genes, or more specifically, half your genes. So every time you have a child, you increase the number of genes that are actually, you increase the copies of your genes that are actually in play. You never get a complete copy. You're always missing a certain amount. But every child has half of your genes. Well, if you think about it, it turns out that actually other members of your family also carry half your genes, even if you didn't directly, create them through sex. For instance, if you have a brother, it may not seem like you should have a particular interest in having your brother pass on. You may not care whether your brother survives, except in the sense that your brother is usually the product of the same two parents that you came from, and they contributed half their genetic material to you, and you get half of it from your father, half of it from your mother. Your brother also gets half of it from your father and half of it from your mother. And so it turns out that if you do the math, your brother actually has the same amount of shared genetic stuff with you as your child. Now, you love your children more generally because they're younger and more likely to have a lot more children later. But people love their brothers and sisters too. And this provides kind of an explanation why. Your brother isn't exactly like you, so seeing to the survival of your brother is not the same as trying to survive yourself. So in general, we value our own lives a little bit more than those of our family. Which is why J.B.S. Haldane, one of the famous early pioneers of evolutionary theory, once said, as a joke, "Would I lay down my life to save my brother? No, but I would for 2 brothers or 8 cousins." And then, of course, there is romantic love. Now, that is basically a whole different ballgame, because the people that you fall in love with and enjoy as husbands and wives and sex partners, presumably, hopefully, are not directly related to you in a family sense.
It's actually a bad thing. In the most cases, it's built in. It's one of those things that we kind of learn and understand naturally.
It's generally taboo in like every culture, almost.
Because it has bad consequences, because you already share so much genetic material that combining them, if it's kept to a small enough pool, can produce bad things.
Right, like failure to be immune to a lot of diseases and things like that. It's generally frowned on in most cultures for people to marry within their family circle, and this isn't necessarily just, you can put all kinds of rationales behind it, but really the reason people feel uncomfortable about it is because, again, genes tend to, we tend to have genes passed down to us which have been selected in the past as especially useful to the survival of the genes. And a culture which encourages a lot of of brothers marrying sisters winds up not being so healthy in general. This is kind of another kind of love between a husband and a wife than the kind of love that you have between a father and a son, or brothers, or mothers and sisters. I don't want to be too sexist about this. I just happen to be a man, so I'm putting things in those terms. Again, this doesn't sound particularly romantic, but the feeling of falling in love with a person of the opposite sex is really your genes thrusting emotions on you, which sort of compel you in a way to do things that are good for the genes. And in that case, it's go out and find people and profess your undying love for them, and in the process, go out and make a lot of other little kids who have those same genes. A lot of the literature in evolutionary psychology is about sort of the psychology of sex. I recommend a great book called The Red Queen by Matt Ridley, who thinks of sexual evolution as sort of an arms race between men and women, where they're always trying to get some sort of advantage in the reproductive race. But what is advantageous to one gender is not necessarily in the best interests of the other gender. So there's actually some conflicting coevolution going on, almost as if men and women were separate species who keep developing new things to try to get around the defenses that the other gender has. So let's see if we can identify some of the things that are unique, that are different between men and women. Because here's a news flash: men and women are different. No. And not just physically, but in certain ways mentally. And this is where I'm treading on really dangerous ground, because a person...
Because you've got a sister and a wife and two stepdaughters who'll kick your ass if you say the wrong thing.
Right. Because a lot of dumb people would take this opportunity to say that women are mentally inferior to men, or men are mentally inferior to women. And what I'm talking about is not that one gender is better or worse. They're just different. And they're different in extremely understandable and clear, rational ways when you look at things in the light of gene selection. So first of all, let's consider what is the fundamental difference between men and women, throwing out all this, all the stuff about what makes men happy when they look at women and what makes women want to be with a man. There's really only one thing that is definitionally necessary for any species anywhere. If a species has two sexes, one is male, one is female, and the definition of a woman is the one who has the kids. That's really all there is to it. But when you start considering that major difference, you start to see how there are different sorts of strategies between, there are different sorts of strategies that work better for men as for women. For instance, if you just think about what a man has to invest in a relationship in order to successfully pass on his genes versus a woman, basically the man has to invest maybe 5 minutes. Ideally, if you're a really successful man, then you got to invest a lot more than that. But I'm just talking purely physically. You can pass on your genes in 5 minutes or less. On the other hand, if you're a woman, you are invested in having a child for at least 9 months. There's just no getting around that. If you don't put in the full 9 months, barring modern technology and stuff, but as a woman, you have to go through 9 months of voluntarily or involuntarily taking care of this kid who is inside you. And if you don't go through that, then you don't pass on your genetic material. That means...
Although in fairness, the guy doesn't get to pass on his genetic material either if the woman doesn't go through with it.
That's true.
So that creates some kind of vested interest for him to, for the creation of, for example, a family unit.
Yeah,
that
creates that certainly creates a vested interest for the guy to make sure that the woman survives, which gets back to romantic love, caring for the woman who is probably going to bear your children. But we consider extreme cases like the story of Don Juan, who made a practice of going around and made a sport of having sex with as many women as possible. And this was way before the development of the pill and other such things. So that probably meant he went and left a lot of children behind. From an evolutionary perspective, that was a really successful guy. I'm not advocating that sort of behavior because also Don Juan met kind of an ugly end, I think. Or at least in Mozart's version, Don Giovanni, he got killed by a ghost, which probably wasn't the real story.
I'm guessing not.
No. The angry ghost of one of his conquest's fathers who he killed on his way. But anyway... It's not to women's advantage to do that sort of thing, because even if you're sleeping with 100 guys, you can only have one baby every 9 months.
And if you're sleeping with 100 guys, odds are you're having one baby every 9 months.
Right. And this does show up in the way that men and women think about sex. Not all men are Don Giovanni, but just consider the difference for a minute between male and female pornography. What do you see a lot of in male pornography? It's, I don't want to overgeneralize here, but hi, ma'am, I'm here to deliver this pizza. Oh, excuse me, I just stepped out of the shower. Can we have sex now? This is the kind of thing men fantasize about, which is random attractive women coming and agreeing to have sex with a man. Now, what is female pornography like? I hear that things like, I haven't studied this at all, but I hear that things like Playgirl with just pictures of random naked men don't tend to sell very well. But what does sell really well for women is romance novels. And romance novels have a lot of pornographic material in them. A lot of them have really graphic descriptions of sex. But they also have character development. there's a lot of stuff that leads up to the actual sexual act in a romance novel, and what leads up to that is sort of designed by the author to appeal to the reader's brain and make them feel warm, comfortable feelings towards the characters that are involved.
See, if you
and
wrote
then they have hot monkey love.
Yeah, if you wrote a scene, and it doesn't necessarily have to always be the development thing. For example, if you wrote a scene for a romance novel where this woman in the 19th century is on a coach traveling through, and this masked marauder comes and stops the coach and jumps in and is ready to rob her and sweeps her off his feet in this mad, passionate thing, and they have sex. Right up to that point, you've appealed to the guys. Then if they actually fall in love, you've appealed to the women.
Right.
I think.
And, just speaking generally, women...
Which is going to come back to bite us.
Yeah, I know it is. And if it doesn't come to bite us with the callers today, then wait till you see the emails that are going to come flooding in after the podcast hits.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it's a good thing I'm already married.
You stupid sexist guys. You.
Right. But just speaking broadly, except to the extent that they're tempered by society, males of the species tend to be really interested in the notion of random sexual encounters, and women tend to be a lot more choosy about it. Well, let me actually wrap it up here, because I was going to go off into another section. I've talked about family love and I've talked about romantic love. There's still another kind of love, which is kind of in some ways more of a head scratcher than either of the other two, which is basically having friends. A certain kind of platonic love with people you don't sleep with and people you aren't related to, but you would make great sacrifices on their behalf. And like I said, people who think of things through an evolutionary lens tend to want to view behaviors and say that if these behaviors weren't advantageous to you, then or your genes at least, then you wouldn't have them because they'd have gone extinct. And the question is sort of like, why would a guy in a war throw his body on a live grenade to rescue his buddies? And that's kind of a stumper because it doesn't really seem to have any direct evolutionary advantage, but that's something that we'll cover next month when we talk about game theory.
Okay. We're going to start taking callers now. The number's up on the screen. Just as a quick reminder, we're going to, after the program's over, we'll be going to IHOP at I-35 and Cesar Chavez. And any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. So if you're on the phone and you're not doing anything after the show, you're welcome to come down, provided you're not going to, preach, proselytize, or provoke. We are live today, Sunday, July 22nd, 2007. So if you don't see the number, that means we're not live right now. Sometimes these things get rebroadcasted. And if you're watching on Google Video, you definitely shouldn't see the number and shouldn't be calling. But we'll start taking callers. Bill, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Pretty good.
Good. I find it pretty interesting watching your show and basing most of your topics on the theory of evolution.
Well, that was my decision a few months ago to spend a lot of time on this topic since it comes up so frequently by the callers anyway.
Right. Well, my comment was that basing emotions, love, hate, etc., on the theory that we evolved from some one-celled living organism when the Earth was created by some giant bang, that emotions have some kind of relationship to that is a stretch.
Why?
Did I not explain it well?
Well, what you explained was based on genes that we pass on from person to person, that somehow those genes have some type of emotional code in them.
No.
I'm sorry. If I got that impression across, then I should have explained it better.
Right. Yeah, because basically I don't see the link between emotions and evolution.
The genes make up who you are, and part of your emotional responses is based on who you are, how your brain's wired together, what kind of brain you have, how you process information. Those things are a real part of us at the genetic level. That doesn't mean you're not still taught certain things and you don't still react to certain things. But
Right.
some of your reactions and some of your emotions are hard-coded at the gene level.
For instance, earlier
And
when
most of them,
earlier
some of them are maybe, but most of them are learned behavior.
Okay, demonstrate that.
well, I mean, for
Demonstrate
instance,
learned behavior.
emotions aren't learned behavior for the most part. I mean, earlier I was talking about putting your hand on a hot stove and jerking your hand back, and that requires higher brain. That requires brain functioning to actually make the movement that
Yeah, I
that
agree
gets
with
your
that.
hand
I
off
mean,
the
if
stove,
if
but
get
you
burnt
don't.
and you experience the emotion of pain,
Right.
which is, then of course that's not learned behavior, right?
I guess
But-
it would be correct to say that basically you don't control your emotions, but you do control on an intellectual level how you deal with those emotions. And so there are two different things at play here.
That's true. I agree with
And
that.
the learned
But-
part basically, the learned part is basically teaching you how to deal with, how to utilize, and how to take advantage of the emotions that you already possess. So the cultural influence on you, the way the society you're raised in, the type of people you're raised around, will have an effect on who you end up loving and what type of person you end up loving. But your ability to love is something that is genetic.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree
Okay.
with that.
Great.
Right. And but I still wonder how you link that genetic those emotions to evolution.
You just
the race
hang on,
evolves,
hang on,
we throw in a new emotion like hate, and prior to that we never had to hate, and then all of a sudden as we're
I put you on hold. I didn't hang up. It's really frustrating. You just agreed.
We always clarify that there's a problem with the phones that makes it hard for the callers to hear us when they're talking.
Yeah, and it's insanely frustrating because I'm having the same problem with the new device that we just got, which is based on this, but it's not supposed to happen. You just agreed that the possession of these emotions is genetic. And now you're saying, but you don't understand how that relates to evolution. The passing on of genes is all evolution is about. I mean, I don't see where the problem is.
Well, the problem is evolution is a theory. We can both agree on that, correct?
Okay, it depends.
Can you explain what you think the word theory means?
Theory means somebody comes up with an idea that they think is a good idea and that the way things are working as they know it, and that is a theory.
No.
Well, there's a lot that you left out when it comes to scientific.
Well, I mean, I
theories.
a whole class of class of evolution.
It's
of
real. It's
a
real
theory,
simple.
Of a theory, but I mean, basically, you have, a theory is, the evolution is a theory. I mean,
Evolution-
we can all agree on that.
No,
Okay.
no, we won't all agree. Hang on
what
just a second,
you've
because
just
we need to get a link
described-
up. We need to get a link up to notjustatheory.com. Because
Oh.
first of all, evolution is a fact. It is an observation that's demonstrable. Now, you can go on with the theory thing.
And what you've described to some extent is a hypothesis, which is basically, in scientific terms, a hypothesis is when you come up with an idea, you haven't tested it, you don't know if it's true or not. A theory in science is basically a well-tested framework which has been confirmed repeatedly and has survived a lot of scientific scrutiny.
It is the
There-
highest possible achievement of science, a theory.
Right, and there's a misunderstanding that theory means something that's not a fact yet, which is not true. Theories and facts are different kinds of things. Facts are things that are observed, but theories are frameworks that explain the observed facts to the best possible abilities of the current scientific research. And in that sense, yes, evolution is a theory. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Yeah,
Okay.
but on the same sense, if you're talking like that, the fact that we were created with order and design, that's a fact.
No, it's not.
I'm afraid not.
Sure it is. I mean, even the new evidence of how a gene is not just some one-celled organism that
That's
nothing
not
else.
new evidence. That's been known for a long time. It
No,
still
it's
fits
not-
in
it's
with
not been known.
evolutionary
Matter of
theory.
fact, the lady who had just recently proven that within a gene there's multiple machines that do jobs like push things around and pick up things and kill things, and each machine is designed for a specific use within that one
I'm
cell.
objecting
No.
to your use of the word design,
Me
which is
too.
an assumption.
You're claiming that the fact that we are designed and this is a fact. And I'm saying, no, it's not a fact, and no matter how many times you assert it, doesn't make it a fact. The true observation is that within the cell, there are chemical machines that perform functions. From that, you cannot infer design. You need to demonstrate design. So creation is not a fact.
Sure, just like
No, it's
evolution
not.
is not a fact.
No, evolution, the fact that things
Creation
change,
isn't
is a
even
fact.
a theory, is the point.
Creation
Things
isn't a
might adapt, okay, but
Creation is not a fact. It's not a theory. It barely qualifies as a hypothesis. You're asking the wrong questions. The fact that we exist does not demonstrate that we were in fact designed by higher intelligence. That's something you have to prove and not simply assert.
well, nobody has proved evolution, and you guys want.
No. Evolution is an observable fact. The theory of evolution is the best scientific explanation that fits that fact, and it's accepted. You're trying to claim that we were created and this is a fact. It's not. You need to demonstrate that, and you can come up with a theory, as people like Dembski or Behe have, about intelligent design. The problem is that when these guys come up with these theories, they just don't hold water. They don't prove anything. They come up with irreducible complexity, and yet at every turn when they say, oops, this is irreducibly complex, somebody comes along and shows how it's not.
But the Finch that was that started the whole evolutionary theory.
Actually, and I'll let you get back to it, but evolution was hypothesized long before Darwin, way back in
Darwin
ancient
only
Greece.
came up with a mechanism which turned out to have stood up to scrutiny.
The ancient Greeks had already hypothesized that we were descended from earlier organisms. But go ahead.
It might have been before Darwin, but it was never considered such a serious religion until Darwin.
It's
It's
never
not a
been
religion
considered
now.
a serious religion.
It's not a religion now, and this time I did actually hang up on you. Because if you're going to come on here having no knowledge of what we're actually discussing and having a significant failure of understanding with regard to what a scientific theory is, and make claims that evolution is just a theory, creationism is a fact, evolution is a religion, you don't get any more time on the show. Sorry. Visit Talk Origins. The answer is there. You can feel free to email us, tv@atheist-community.org. I'll be happy to have a discussion with you. But you don't get to come on here and spread the footnote soundbite versions directly from the Discovery Institute that simply aren't true.
Right. I mean, you know, the reason, and I know we sometimes seem a little abrupt to people who haven't seen the show before, but if you go back and watch back episodes, you'll see that we address a lot of this stuff every week. Sometimes we have entire shows discussing that issue. And, you know, there's a certain amount of knowledge that, you know, that is just on such a basic level that sometimes we just wave people off to the fact.
Yeah, there's an FAQ up the website. You can go to www.atheist-community.org. For more information about evolution, you can go to talkorigins.org, where, I kid you not, every objection and every claim and every comment that he just said is addressed, and way, 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 way more. There's a good response to nearly any creationist claim. What you've done is you might as well have just come on here and said the earth is flat, this is a fact, and those who say that it's round just have a theory. You don't understand what scientific theories are. The theory of gravitation is a scientific theory. The fact that gravity exists, something we label, this attraction that bodies have, that's a fact. It's observable, and evolution's the same way. I highly recommend that you go to not just a theory, it's either .org or .com, you'll find it. It's about 5 paragraphs, it's really short, it explains this in great detail, and I fail to see how anybody who reads something like that just couldn't get it.
Anyway, this is a problem with doing a multi-part series over 6 months because, these are exactly the kind of issues that I talked about specifically in previous installments of my evolution talk.
Except that Bill has been watching for those and called during those as well. I'm pretty sure that Bill's seen this. He's just spouting whatever it is that he believes without doing anything or showing anything to support it.
But, I mean, there's a misconception out there that there is some kind of scientific controversy over whether evolution happened or not. And the fact is, there's not.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people with a religious agenda who don't like the implications that evolutionary theory have for their religion. But within science, within people who actually study biology, there is, all but a very, very, very tiny percentage of people actually recognize that evolution is the explanation for the diversity of life.
So on that note, we'll go on to another caller. We got Terry. How you doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, well, let me see if I can get us back onto a topic that maybe will, instead of arousing creationists, maybe arouse some of the politically correct people and get them mad at me instead of you.
Okay.
All right.
They can be mad at all of us. There is enough anger to go around.
I had written something and sent it into a bunch of forums and got some of this attack back as if I was being sexist. Although, if you actually listen to what I'm saying, it's not. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I would like to read just this excerpt, which I think applies to the topic you're dealing with today.
Okay.
To become persons, meaning entities with rights and obligations, whose free moral agency is consistent with a universally free society, most humans must, to some extent, transcend part of their biological heritage. And my basis for that statement is that the idea, the concept of a universally free society is relatively recent in history, only in the last few hundred years. And of course, evolutionary changes have not caught up with that. So
you're talking about a culture that sort of encourages a thriving middle class as opposed to just a few really rich people and a whole bunch of poverty-ridden peasants.
Basically, where everybody, I guess the term could be reciprocal, comprehensive, physical autonomy for each and every person. That everybody is a person instead of some people being persons and other people being their property or serfs. Mm-hmm. So here's the other thing I said is that is going to get me in trouble with some people. All right, female humans in general are biologically optimized for breeding, nurturing vulnerable babies and children through a lengthy, or relatively lengthy, development into early adulthood. And attracting and securing maintenance and support for her brood, usually by a male who is powerful enough to be a good provider and protector. This is why power is generally such an aphrodisiac to breeding age females. The optimal range of attention is the nest with its clients to which they are giving care and keeping the provider involved or maybe committed. Male humans who are not sufficiently susceptible to the charms of involvement in this scenario so that they will risk life and limb, if need be, in successful quests for provisions are less likely to have their genetic dispositions promoted. Okay,
now,
you wouldn't believe how much venom I got back over that.
No, I would.
And oddly enough, I didn't have any problem with the second part. I just had a problem with the first part.
Well, I mean, just to shield you from the hordes of angry politically correct people, let me just say something that I'm going to see if you agree with.
Okay.
By saying that, you're not making a prescription for how people should act in a society. You're just sort of you're not saying women are genetically suited to bearing children, so they should stay barefoot in the kitchen. You're saying this is how, in fact, they do tend to act, and what are we going to do based on that?
And not only that, I'm saying this is the biological heritage, and that I'm actually saying that, describing that landscape, so that we can acknowledge and
Right.
appreciate those who make the effort to rise above that, to actually participate in the free being persons, which is something relatively new in our biological heritage. And
I
so,
think
you
I'm
know,
with you.
Yeah, in the first part, you used the phrase that we would transcend a part of our biological heritage.
Yes.
And I think you're just saying that we are biologically predisposed to these particular roles for the purposes of breeding and passing on genes, but as a cooperative, intelligent society, we can transcend those boundaries in order to create something that is, we hope, potentially better for everybody in the long run.
And that's relatively new in history, so new
Right.
that our biology has not had a chance to catch up with it.
I agree. I mean, what's new is that basically we are at the point where we are sort of thriving enough as a species that we can pay attention to other things that don't involve eating, surviving, and having sex, but actually focus on things that we do as sort of art, so to speak, and isn't directly related to just our evolutionary drive.
Yeah, I think I'm like 99% with you. My one objection is that I'm not necessarily sure, and this may be a fault of my own limited understanding of it, that the types of things we're talking about, where we would say we're transcending our biological heritage, I don't know that we're really transcending our biological heritage. It may be that these are aspects of our biological heritage which are separate from our reproductive tendencies.
Well, I would, maybe we're not really in disagreement here. Yes, obviously, we have come up with concepts, and it is us, the biological creatures, that have this mentality that has come up with with these concepts. I am saying that they are in conflict with part of our biology. And I'm saying that not, as the other guy there pointed out, I'm not saying that to say, women, this is your role, this is how you were made, so it's just the opposite. It's it's setting the stage to understand the vehicle upon which our consciousness rides, and understand that it's relatively recent in history that we are coming to a place where we have both the understanding and material prosperity to have roles that are different than that. And also, I'm not saying every human being
Right.
conforms to the models that I just laid out. I'm
Sure.
just saying, because I got a lot of heat over that. I said, well, I know a woman who doesn't,
Yeah, right.
Well, and then there's also homosexuals, but we're talking about something completely different there.
Yeah,
I definitely agree, and this is an interesting kind of off-the-cuff hypothesis. We are definitely creatures in conflict between different aspects of our nature, and I'm wondering if it's possible that it may just be the rise of that initial conflict that has spiraled towards a more intelligent society, because learning how to deal with conflict and balance those two, obviously the ones who are successful at it are the ones who are more likely to reproduce, and this kind of perpetuates this conflict between the biological reproductive heritage and the intellectual heritage of being able to the consciousness and free will, and being able to assess a situation, determine what's better for everybody down the road.
Yeah, sort of a spiritual matter antimatter engine, as it were, that's propelling us forward. You mentioned gay people. Well, gays or homosexuality is nothing new in man or nature.
Yeah.
It's just that that's not part. The ones who are strictly homosexual are genetically not. They're not going to have their genes forwarded. The ones who are bisexual, of course, will, providing they're successful enough in other terms. There's one other category here, which is called the interloper, because somebody's going to come up and say, "Oh yeah, well, what about the guy who sneaks in behind and and just impregnates a bunch of women? The Don Juan stuff."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not particularly unique to humanity. You can watch Burbage monkeys in a cage, and you will eventually see, okay, they're very hierarchical in terms of the male possesses the female and all that kind of stuff, but the female will occasionally be open to an interloper. And if you're lucky enough, you can catch a scenario where the male that is the possessor of that particular female catches them and begins to attack, and the female will immediately side with the male that owns her, quote unquote, in attacking the interloper. So interloper stuff happens, and I guess that may be a little wild card in our genetic development, and it's nothing unique to
this
humanity.
is kind of analogous in a way to like stories about the Sultan who has a harem full of 1,000 wives, and there's less women to go around the village, but the dashing young man sneaks over the wall and has a romantic, has his way with one of the wives who falls in love with him.
Yes, and let's for a moment just discuss this difference between. Obviously, you're very good at detailing the difference between what women are interested in terms of quote pornography versus males. They're more interested in the relational aspects of things, obviously, because they're more interested in who's going to take care of them and protect them while they're in this vulnerable state. Carrying a child and then having, human young have to have a long nurturing period before they're ready, and so you got to. So that means this can be. You could sum this up in something that's almost going to be really crass, but it's just funny. It's just. Eggs are expensive, sperm is cheap. This is why males, their biological heritage is to get it in anywhere they can, impregnate anywhere they can. Females are biologically disposed to be extremely selective.
Although it's worth pointing out that the calculation has changed a lot in the last 50 years when when a lot of birth control technologies have come up, because we have the biological drive to go out and have a lot of sex, and we have the biological drive to love the child that pops out 9 months later. But that doesn't mean. But I mean, those things are programmed in. But in a way, we've kind of short-circuited the process by providing a means where we can have a lot of sex and not generate the responsibility of a child almost always coming out of that.
Yeah, sure.
And that's one of the things that has the religious right so generally threatened.
I understand. Yeah, as you said, this is a recent development, and so it has not had a chance to be reflected in the biological heritage that we build up. Now, one of the things that could change this in our very near future is we are getting into genetic engineering. So we may, in the near future, change some of the biological heritage or the nature of the biological vehicle that we ride upon once we learn enough about genetic design and redesign people so that they're more in conformance with the free will decisions that we're making about how we want to be as a people. But that does, for the time being, where we live right now. We have these aspirations that come out of our consciousness at the same time that they're having to be somewhat, they have to cope with the different aspirations generated by the biology.
Right. All right.
And you'd be surprised how many people, maybe you wouldn't be surprised how many people attack me for putting that out.
I can imagine.
I won't attack you. I happen to agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're on the same page. Thanks for a great call, Terry. Appreciate it.
And
Good luck.
As a reminder,
as far as the genetic engineering goes, some people will find that inspiring and some will find it creepy.
As a reminder, we'll be going to IHOP after the show. I know they put the notice up. Terry and anybody else, welcome to come down and join us as long as you're not coming down to preach to us. It's at I-35 and Cesar Chavez. The address is up on the screen right over there in front of Russell. We get there about 5 o'clock. We got the room from 5 to 7. And we got a few more calls online. There's about 20 minutes left in the show. There's a couple lines open if you want to call in and you couldn't get through earlier. Now's the time. Noel?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Oh, doing pretty good. Really enjoyed that last caller, by the way. That was fascinating.
Yeah.
This is sort of off the subject that y'all been talking about today, but I was just curious. Y'all were talking a few weeks ago, and I couldn't get through. Some long-winded guy at the end of the show sort of hogged all the time.
Me or somebody calling?
Somebody calling. But I'm curious. You were talking about reality. Could either or both of you give your definitions of reality?
I'll take a crack at it.
Okay.
We observe the world through a filter of our brain interpreting things. But philosophers generally agree that we don't do this in a vacuum. We're not just some elaborate computer simulation making up stuff about the world as we go along. And that when I say I'm sitting here with my hands on a brown table, that brown table actually maps onto something in the universe that can be communally experienced by many people in similar ways. So there's actually a table here, and that's independent of my beliefs. That's reality.
Okay. Does your friend have another definition, or do you agree?
I just gave a definition of reality at the wiki the other day as part of a discussion.
Iron Chariots?
Yeah. ironchariots.org, but it was in the forums as part of a discussion. The short version sounds like a tautology, but it's really not. And my definition of reality is everything that's real. And I say that because I don't want to subdivide reality into, well, there's a material, physical reality, and then there's a spiritual reality, and then there's perhaps a supernatural reality or a fairy reality or whatever, where these things have, where something has been separated from the ability to demonstrate itself. Tracy Harris uses the phrase manifests, anything that actually manifests. And I'm saying that reality is everything that we actually experience that is actually real.
And, we can be completely wrong in our perceptions about what reality is. I was hearing an interesting interview the other day talking about how history is really inaccurate because we only get it from the historical winners, and they tend to do they tend to write things that make themselves look good. And there are a lot of things that we believe about history that are probably wrong. Nevertheless, it would be accurate to say, whether we know about them or not, there are some things that actually happened in history, and there would be one way of describing it. There would be a particular way of describing it that would be right if we had a time machine and perfect perception.
Well, look at it one more way.
Okay.
This came into my mind some time ago, and I can't think out of it. I can't think past it, but in all of time, you essentially have the past, the present, and the future. And reality has to exist in the present. Isn't that correct?
No, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that.
Well, you can't fill that table.
I think I would.
You can't fill that table tomorrow. You can't fill that table yesterday.
Yeah,
you can't fill that table today.
I think I agree with what you're saying but when I'm talking about reality, I'm talking about propositional knowledge in general, which means that in the present, I can say that this table was here last week. And that is part of reality, both the statement that I'm making a claim about the past and whether or not this was true in the past. It's true now that it was true in the past.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. You accept the past as part of reality.
Well, also there's some interesting work about treating space as 3 dimensions and treating time as a 4th dimension. And what we call the past is just an area where our window of perception has already moved on beyond. But there's still a dimension of time where if you move in the correct direction, then those events all still exist in a way.
But since none of that's open to me, then I'm fine with reality is the here and now. I just don't want to be dismissive of the past as if there's nothing we can claim to know about it or understand.
One of the things that bothers me about certain political operatives who shall remain nameless is that they'll say things like,
they've got names.
On this show for the moment.
Okay.
They'll say things like, there are weapons of mass destruction at such and such a location. And then, you go and look at the evidence and you say, actually, the records show that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction at the time you said it. And then they'll say, yes, there were, they're invisible, or, I never said that.
Yeah. Well,
which
both
bugs
of you
me.
seem to be dwelling on the past on both your answers, because what I'm looking at is more of a physical reality, not just a mental reality. But you're also true that, or at least in my opinion, that all reality is in the mind. It can't be any place else.
No?
No, it can't be, because you go from the past to the present to the future. There's
Sorry,
no way to grasp.
we're not going to agree on that.
Well, how do you grasp the present? Live for the day, so to speak, because the present really doesn't exist. It's fleeting. It's gone. As close as you can get is taking a photograph of something.
What you're talking about has nothing to do with definitions of reality. You seem to be talking about the limitations on experience, of what you can actually experience at any given moment.
Exactly. What you can experience as reality.
Well, that's a completely different thing from give a definition of reality. I mean, if you want to talk about give a definition of what you can experience at any given instant, I mean, that's slightly different. You're going to only experience a very limited portion of what's real.
But
I mean, like, you're not a solipsist, right? You don't think that you're the only person in the world, and when you close your eyes, everybody disappears.
No, I'm not that crazy yet.
So,
and so I'm assuming, since you're calling us in live, you're in Austin or in the Austin area.
Oh yeah, I'm in Austin.
Today you are not in Australia, but that doesn't change the fact that Australia exists, does it?
In the past.
no.
No, right now, because you're only experiencing a small chunk of reality right now.
That's the point I'm trying to make. All that we can ever exist is an extremely small chunk of reality.
Yeah, but Australia
so
still
fleeting,
exists,
it
right?
cannot possibly exist.
Does Australia exist right now?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Okay.
Then there's if that's going to be your definition of reality, then I don't think we're going to actually agree on anything.
Okay. I don't think I'm making my point here.
If you're going to limit reality to just what you personally experience at a given instant in
I'm
time,
not talking just me. I'm talking about anyone on this planet with a mind.
you just said
cannot
that
exist.
Australia doesn't exist.
I'm sorry?
You just said that Australia doesn't exist right now.
Right now, it doesn't exist.
Okay.
And now doesn't exist, because by the time you say now, the Australia that was then is gone. Now you have a brand new
No, now
Australia coming up.
No, now is now is now.
Now does not exist.
Okay.
Okay. Well, then you should turn off your TV and we'll go out, bang like a candle, and cease to exist.
Yeah, we're not on the air now. We were on the air a minute ago.
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't think I can make my point to you, because it really goes into areas of physics, quantum mechanics, and lots of other things that everything is in motion. All matter is made of energy.
Okay.
With all energy in motion, how on the earth can
That's
now
true,
exist
but
when everything
also-
is moving? You can't
but also
reach out
next
and
to-
grasp anything.
The fact that you can't grasp an instant is irrelevant.
Why?
Well, because I know I existed when you called, and I know I'm going to exist after I hang up. So I can look at the entire time span and look at that as a sequence of nows. It kind of goes back
But
to...
you, as you are, this very second,
Hang on.
cease to exist at this very
Hang
second.
on. It kind of goes back to Zeno's paradoxes. For example, if you constantly take steps that divide your distance in half, you can never get to your target. What you're describing is something that relates to that, and it has to do with the failure of trying to create an actual infinity and how it relates to creating an actual instant. And it's way beyond the scope, and it's also irrelevant because, like I said, I know I existed when you called, and I know I'm going to exist after the call is over, so that we can look at that time spans as a whole and say that this is a now that is more than the smallest possible measure of time, because there's no such thing as the smallest possible measure of time. You can
So
continue.
You can't accept reality without the past and the future.
I can accept.
Oh, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Other than with the past and the future.
Okay, no.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give it my time for whoever else wants to call in.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Actually, we have no other callers at the moment.
No, there's one. There's one getting ready on there. The thing is that you could possibly, like with the 5-minute Earth hypothesis, that in fact everything sprung into existence exactly 5 minutes ago and was created in a state in which I have memories.
John called
that go,
back. I was sorry that we lost him earlier.
You have memories intact, or memories have been fabricated to make you think that the universe has been around more than 5 minutes, but in reality it's been only around 5 minutes. And it turns out that one of the big problems with the 5-minute Earth is that 5 minutes is arbitrary, and you still get down to this, let's define a point. And if you take a look at Zeno's paradoxes, you'll understand that what you're actually trying to do is create an actual infinity and define an instant that you cannot do. So that your confusion, I guess, is along there.
Yeah,
but
let's see. We have 8 minutes left in open phone lines, so we could probably squeeze in another caller after this one, and then there's IHOP afterwards. And I really want to talk to John because John wants to talk some more about porn.
Cool. John, you there?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, man. This is the objective subjective guy from last week, Matt.
Oh. This is objective, subjective,
Yeah.
and everything is subjective, and yet you're telling me that I'm wrong.
I'm sorry, I was talking while you were talking, and I missed what you said.
That's all right.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think Australia exists.
Well, I should put you on the phone with the last caller, and because
convince him.
he believes that reality is subjective, that whatever doesn't exist for him at the moment doesn't exist. And you called in last week to say almost the exact same thing, that everything is subjective, and that therefore there's no basis to tell somebody else that they're wrong. Yet you told me you were wrong. I was wrong. But anyway,
words in my mouth again, Matt. I did not say that the objectivity was useless, because as soon as I got off the phone last week, you said that I had said objectivity was useless, and I didn't say that.
Well, okay, you may not have
higher reality.
You may not have used those words, and you may not even realize that that's what you said. But sometimes I do this thing where I take a call and I summarize it and paraphrase it into what the call actually means, even if the person didn't realize it. But anyway, you called today to talk about.
That's your subjective thinking, is what I was trying to say.
Well,
then your interpretation.
Then you should have been clearer. But today you called about porn, so get to it.
I was going to say, porn is bullshit, man. It's like all consumerism, and this idea. I mean, I can agree, because I'm into agreement more than I'm into disagreement, that women, are into romance and are, attracted to that, and men are more visual and visceral and quicker, and fantasize about the pizza boy with the big salami and everything.
Well, they don't fantasize
reality,
about the boy, but yeah.
Creates these stereotypes, and I had a girlfriend who used to like gay porn, and gay porn is the most masculine of all porn there is, and it is complete bullshit. And I don't think there's anybody. I think there's people who fantasize about fantasizing about it, and they rent it. And I mean, I'm not a home, but nobody can turn it on by that. And
Are you wondering why I hadn't hung up on you yet, or you lost me somewhere? Evidently the line went dead. So if you want to call back in with a little less, I don't know, bullshit.
Well, I mean, I don't think porn is bullshit. I mean, it's a fact that people enjoy sex and enjoy sort of proxy sex by looking at other people who are having it. I mean, not all people, obviously, but it is a pretty big seller. And, I mean, consumerism or not, I kind of tend to believe that you can't, I mean, for the most part, you can't have a really successful product that doesn't fulfill some kind of desire in their consumers.
Right. The whole consumerism thing, if you were going to make a point about that, one thing they have to realize is that it's kind of a circular thing. These ad agencies don't just invent something that everybody all of a sudden likes. They play on the desires that we already have, and those desires can shift and change over time, and they can be directed by advertising agencies and consumerism, where we steer in a certain direction because we're more exposed to that. But the base desires that they're playing on, the basis desires that they're playing on, those are genetically predisposed by evolution. Sorry, that's just the way it is. People like to have sex. I mean, that's
And
the way
there's
it is.
good reasons, as I just explained in the first half hour.
Yeah.
And boy, this show is really going downhill because we started out talking about erudite, scientific concepts, and now we're only seemingly talking about gay porn.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that our next caller, who has called to talk about gay porn, maybe they're a little more scholarly in there.
Keep your finger on the button, please.
How you doing, Ed?
Fine.
Yes.
Well, I'm calling because I am gay, and I
Okay.
don't enjoy gay porn. But I know a lot
You're
of
the
women.
second gay person to tell me that.
Yeah, but I know a lot of straight women that do.
Yeah, I've heard that
So
too.
I don't know. Maybe they make gay porn for straight women. I don't know. But I'm more of a voyeur. I actually prefer straight porn to gay porn. So
There's a comedian, I don't remember which one it was, who has this joke about these rednecks who like porn, who are saying, "Oh, I'm not the slightest bit gay," with and he starts to ask them, "Okay, what kind of porn do you like? Do you like porn where there's just a naked woman?" And they immediately respond with, "Oh no, I like," and then they go into a description of the guy in there too, and if it kind of plays on this idea that human sexuality is a broad spectrum, and that you're X% straight or X% gay along
Kinsey
those
scale.
lines. Yeah.
right. I guess that's my point, is that sexuality is a very complex subject.
Most definitely.
And
That's the best call on gay porn we've ever had. Ed,
it's
you
a very
win.
complex subject. That's all I can say.
Ed, you win. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.
Yes. Sexuality is indeed a very complex subject, and I didn't begin to scratch the surface of it by talking about evolutionary psychology for 30 minutes.
No, none of us are expert enough at sex yet, but we're working on it.
Studio says that would be Ron White,
Yeah.
who I don't care for, but
But it was funny, and I couldn't tell the whole joke because, well, I try not to be completely
we are
crude.
a family show, even though we say bullshit.
Yeah, we got about a minute and a half left on the show. As a reminder for everybody, there's bowling this coming Wednesday. There's happy hour at Dog and Duck on Thursday. You can send your emails and comments, questions, concerns to tv@atheist-community.org, and you can join us at IHOP after the show here in town. I wanted to mention this one quick thing. I picked this up when I was at my smoothie shop the other day. It's a brochure for the University of Metaphysical Sciences, Higher Education for Spiritual Unfoldment,
Unfoldment.
Bachelor, Master's, PhD, DD degrees, bringing professionalism to metaphysics. This is an actual...
Put a bunch of letters after your name which don't mean anything because we're not accredited.
This is some unaccredited... Oh, and they talk about why they're not accredited.
Yes, because accreditation is really overrated.
Yes.
They all say that.
And, but they'll teach you all kinds of good things like engrams. What?
Yeah, well, sorry, I thought we didn't have the last 30
No,
seconds.
I've got 30
but-
seconds.
Okay.
Engrams, shadow work, inner child work for adults, anger management, witchcraft. Wow. I guess we have to talk about that a little bit more on some other show. Thanks, everybody, for
Future
tuning in. Assuming the studio doesn't crash and burn like it's done to us a couple times. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.